Lambic belongs to a region, and we are here very close to the Zenne River. The Zenne Valley is very important, so that means that this valley is just coming from the south of Brussels to the north of Brussels, under Brussels, but all the valleys were, since very long, the region where this beer was brewed.
Lambic is the local beer of this area and certainly of the village of Lambic here, as it was known for a free town where beer was brewed tax-free. And so starting from that origin, Lambic is something that is from us. We were born in Lambic.
Lambic is the oldest of all the modern beers in the world, because the first signs of a beer that we call today Lambic was short after 1420. That's almost 600 years ago. The first recipe we found at 1556 in Halle. Halle is a city in Pajottenland. And from then we see that the way of making that type of beer never changed. So it's really the oldest of all the modern beers of today. When you drink a Lambic, you drink the same as 600 years ago. And that's incredible. America was not discovered when the first Lambic was brewed in this country.
It's a beer method that has survived time. It has survived the age because now with the new technologies, other beer styles are formed and all fermentation is controlled, and Lambic beers are the only remaining spontaneous fermentation beers from before.
You have 24 different types of yeast and bacteria playing an important role in the fermentation. So that's why the Lambic is so complex and impossible to reproduce in laboratory, for example.
For me, Lambic means pure nature. It's something that you can control. It's a process of the malt, the wheat, and you have what we do right here, like the brew, and that we can control a bit in some parts, but then from the boiling on, it goes to the cooling ship, and from that moment on, we don't control it anymore. And that's Lambic, that's uncontrollable. It's pure nature which is uncontrollable, like the weather. Yeah, and which is influenced by the weather too.
Lambic means for me the mother of all beers. It's our heritage that is one of the oldest beers in the world, where we respect nature, and then nature respects us by giving us beautiful complexity in the beer, which Lambic is.
And Lambic is one of the most, for me, idiosyncratic beers in the world. It is not real, maybe not real standard beer, not real standard wine, not very smoky alcohol, but something in between, so kind of a hybrid. And it's the start of a lot of very fantastic tastes, certainly if you can make it a nice bottle of Gueuze.
Was mentioned for the first time when the French came to Belgium. So after the French Revolution, Napoleon with his army conquered Belgium, and Belgium became a part of France. And in that time, we see for the first time the name, not Lambic, but Alambic. Alambic is a machine to make alcohol, because the French, they did not understand the way of brewing beer. And when they saw the brew kettles, they said, that's to make alcohol. And a machine for making alcohol is an alambic. And when the brewer said, no, we don't make alcohol, we make beer, then they said, wow, beer from an alambic. And short after that, the new name of that beer, because French was then the official language in the country, and the new name was Alambic. And the A is falling down, and it's now Lambic.
And we are the beacon for a lot of other producers of spontaneous fermentation beers now elsewhere in the world who are inspired by our Lambic tradition. Lambic tradition is more than 500 years old. It's older than the Reinheitsgebot from Germany. But it's still, the Lambic is still made as 500-600 years ago. That's unique. When you drink a good Lambic, you drink the beer of the Middle Ages. The time when the Spanish were still here.
Lambic was the best-selling beer of Belgium because a lot of brewers making top fermented beers added some Lambic to give the acidity, to give the freshness on the beer, and also, and maybe that's a little bit technical, but also to lower the pH, because a low pH is meaning a beer that will last for long. So they could sell the Lambic everywhere around the country to all the breweries. But then, after the war, science came and new methods came, and short after that, Lambic was only for Lambic beers and not for the other brewers in Belgium. And then the amount of Lambic brewers was really going down. But no problem. After the Second World War, the real problem came because the American soldiers, the GIs, came into the country with Coca-Cola. Very new. And as you maybe know, Coca-Cola is liquid sugar. There's a lot of sugar in Coca-Cola, so it's very, very sweet. And the brewers changed the recipes of the beers, and the Belgian beers became more and more sweet. Problem, of course, a Lambic is not sweet. It's rather acid, sour. So it was going down year after year, and the big crisis was around 1990. Then the most of the Lambic brewers stopped. And what was over the others, they came together and they said, now we have to work together, we have to do something, because when we do nothing, the story will end. And so in 1998, they started a club, and the name is Horal. Horal in our language is Hoge Raad voor ambachtelijke Lambic bieren. I translate for you, the High Council for the craft Lambic beers. They started making publicity together, not I make publicity for my brewery, you make publicity for your brewery. No. They started making publicity together, not for themselves, but for the beer. They started with the Tour de Geuze. Tour de Geuze is an open door day, and all the brewers on the same day open their doors. You can visit them, all. And they organize transport with buses to make the tour. And slowly, outside Belgium, first of all the USA, later the Scandinavian countries discovered that acid beer. So they could live for export. And later, the Belgian young people, and that's very important, young people discovered. And why? Because at one moment, all that sugar, you don't like it anymore. Sugar is very annoying. And young people was looking for new taste, other taste. The first they discovered was, for example, Orval. Orval is a combination of bitterness and acidity. And later on they discovered the real Geus, the real Greek. And of course helped by the movement for more nature, more biological things, less sugar, because nowadays the enemy of human being is sugar. And that's what Lambic beers are. And since then it's going up year after year. And visit all of them, they will not complain. It goes very, very good.
Yes, so I'm Dirk Lindemans, and together with my cousin Geert Lindemans, we are now the 6th generation of this family-owned brewery. So it all started in 1822, when one of my over-grandfathers married the daughter of the former farmer brewer of the farming here in this state. In fact, we only brew one beer, and it's Lambic. And Lambic is a very old beer. It's in fact the oldest beer of the world, still brewed with spontaneous fermentation.
So the first step is we start on 52 degrees. What are we doing? We're taking out the starch of the grains. And then later on we will heat it up. And then by heating up the starch will transform into sugars. And those sugars will later on ferment in the barrels and in the foeders. In this tank, the water is boiling during 4 hours. We are making 2 batches a day, so it means we are boiling during 8 hours a day. We are using old hops of 3 or 4 years old, especially with a low alpha acid. After the boiling, the wort goes to the cool ship, and there he stays overnight. So it means at 100 degrees when he enters the cool ships, and in the morning we will arrive at 16, 17, 18 degrees Celsius. My main job is head brewer, but I also make the blends for the Geuses, the fruit beers.
So Belgium is still the biggest market for us. It's 35%. That means that 65% goes to export. And now, since last year, France is our #1 export country. It was long United States, but due to the craft trend over there, it's quite tough for Belgian breweries to get in the United States. But the fast-growing market is China. Last year we did about 105,000 hectoliter production, and that makes us now almost #1 of the Lambic brewers. There is still one Lambic brewer, a little bit bigger as us, but it's in a group of AB InBev, while we are still independent, so that makes a difference also.
The brewery Cantillon was founded by Paul Cantillon, my great-grandfather, in 1900. The brewery Cantillon exists in fact since 1937, because from 1900 to 1937 we were blenders, and the first brew was made during the season, the winter 1937-1938. My parents has fought during decades to preserve Lambic, to defend traditional Lambic for nothing, without any return, because the 60s, 70s, 80s were very, very difficult time for Lambic. Because of this work they did to preserve such a beer, it was for me totally impossible to say I have no interest for. I know since I was 6, 7, 8 years that my future was in the brewery. So bread needs dextrins for the beer conservation in wooden barrels, and moreover for goose in bottle. You can keep a goose for 25, 30 years without any problem. The long boil is important because we are using aged hop, and this hop, when the hop is oxidized, you have special flavors, cheesy flavors, and it could be a problem if we found back those flavors in the beer. And the only way to avoid it is a long boil, and that's why we are boiling here wort during in between 3 and 4 hours. You are learning a lot with your family, father and grandfather, but I think you are learning a lot with the brewery itself, with the beer, because here I consider my beer and even the building a bit as something alive. And so we are all working together to produce such a magic beer. The blend is probably the most important thing in a Lambic brewery. Yeah. For me, a blend is just a question of feeling. We didn't analyze it, never. It's possible to learn it, but it takes time. You don't learn it. So I tasted Lambic with my father and my grandfather during not so far from 10 years. So it's if you want to realize a blend in the same way. So it could be very easy to produce with the same Lambic present here in the brewery, another beer. But if you want to produce a beer in the same way, the same type of taste and of flavor, you have to learn it with your father, your grandfather, or your ancestors. Belgians people have no more interest for Lambic because foreigners people had interest for Lambic, you know. So the interest for Lambic in Belgium dates from 5-6 years ago, no more. But the interest for Lambic coming from foreigners, other countries, that's end of 90s, end 90s, early 2000.
We had a brewery in the family from my grand-grandfather and from my grand-uncle, and it closed in 1970. Even when I was young, I was a beer lover. So he did send us to different spots, and one of these spots was the Witz, Geuze de Witz in Lambic. He said, this is the most fantastic Geuze, and so I knew the brewer, Mr. de Witz. And then he told me he was going to stop. I said, yeah, but why are you going to stop? You make the most fantastic Geuze of all. And then he said, yeah, okay, but nobody wants to do this. It's not profitable anymore. It has no future. He told me, no, I tried. If someone pays me some money for the building, he can have the rest, but nobody wants it. I said, yes, maybe I should try to find some money. And I started a business to buy the brewery of Mr. de Witz. And from one thing comes another. And that was more than 40 years ago. Legally, you have to use at least 30% of unmalted wheat. We use 40% of malted wheat because it's a traditional recipe, and 60% of lambic malt. And so in the brew house, the brewing system is called the turbid mash system. And the turbid mash system allows to separate most of the gluten of wheat. It allows to make a poor wort. It means that the wort contains low quantities of protein, which is important in aging. On the other end, the temperatures in the brew house are the cause of a part of liquefied starch, which is not converted into sugars. And this part of liquefied starch goes into the wort and stays in the lambic while fermenting. And it will be indeed important for some wild yeasts, mainly Brettanomyces yeast, because they will use it in the process to grow on it and to produce very special tastes from it too. As you know, Lambic is only brewed in the cold winter time, from October until the end of April, and we use a large quantity of hops. All this is important to make a beer that keeps for a long time. The brood, or a part of the brood, is sent to the cool ship, where it cools, of course, but the most important thing is that it picks up wild yeast from the surrounding area of the brewery. After 18 months, Lambic will develop its tastes by the activity of wild yeast, of Brettanomyces yeast. Will not do much in the beginning of fermentation, but it will become active while all the other yeasts are inactive. And that is after 8 months, 10 months about. It depends on the size of the cask, it depends of the thickness of the wood of the cask. It depends on what has been before in the cask. It will develop after 18 months, and we keep beer here for until 3 years. So it is important to follow the beer by tasting, but also in the laboratory. So we have a very classical machine in the laboratory. It's called Anton Paar alcoholyzer, and we take samples from this beer. And I have a list of all the casks of the brewery, with original gravity, alcohol, volume percent, fermentation degree. And this is an easy way to follow the fermentation of the beer. And then there is another analysis, a very easy one, that is by titration. So we take samples, and by titration we can know exactly how much acidity has been developed in the beer. If you make a good bottle of Geuze, there has to be a good acidity balance. So if I make blendings, I do them by tasting, but I will also control them by controlling my blend to see that the acidity is always about the equal. Yeah.
Lambic for me is a region. Lambic is a recipe. Lambic is a history. Lambic is that long experience. My dad continued the existing blender cafe in 1953. I was 2 years when we came to Beersel, and as long as I can remember, I'm drinking, tasting Lambic. And I was working, let's say, from totally free from my father since 75, 76. Yeah. It was very easy to say we are starting brewing Lambic, but it was very complicated to make a good Lambic. It's really not an easy beer. It took all my life, and even today, now I'm 65, I can say I don't know everything. And as more I know, as more I have questions.
When I came from for the job interview, it was Lydie who did the interview. And at that time, Armand was really hardworking. It was during the season, it was March, beginning of March, and Armand had no time. He was just walking around being very active. So when I got the job, I started to get to learn Armand. We had a good connection, so he was very open about the product. So after a few weeks, when he was blending, he asked if I would join him just for the tasting. So to me, he's the teacher. There's no other teacher for me, and there will never be another teacher for me.
Sometimes it's complicated blend. That happens. That instead of using, for example, I would say 20%, oh, we can use only 5%. That happens, yes. That the balance is more difficult to find with the other barrels here. And then you have to taste a lot of beer.
It's the experience that you get from the beer, the first impression that you get from that barrel, which is very important. And then you make decision based on that. Bitterness, acidity, how dry is it on your tongue, fruitiness, complexity, balance, some extra sourness, acidity, or is it more soft? And then you want to work to a Trefontaine product, to a Trefontaine Eau de Gueuse, a Trefontaine Armand Gaston. There are some small measurements that we do, and that's during the process of the blending. Like if you say we make 60 hectoliters blend, after 30, 40 hectos, we go into measure how much rest sugar is left on the blend. And then we know we need some extra punch of sugars, but also do we need some extra punch of acidity, bitterness, or do we want to make it a bit more softer than it is right now? So then we go look for that 1, 2, 3 barrels to complete our blend in our way. But from that moment on, again, it's nature who takes hand of the product. We work to a taste for our blend, but that doesn't mean that our re-fermentation will end up the product the way we want it. So we have some experience on which way it will go. And for us, this is one big question. What will everything be? People are looking for an honest product. They want to know what they are drinking, what they are eating, what they are tasting, how it's made, and without being fooled by additives or juices who give you taste. No, people want the real thing now, and I think that's very important.
It's all well planned. We really have a business plan. And for us, there is one thing, it's so important. Quality. Means we're still doing the same movement like my father taught me. There's nothing different. And now I'm very happy that the growing is just going like it has to be, with respect for the tradition. No filtration, no yeasts, making that all the wild evolution of taste comes like we want to have it. 3 fontainengeuzen. Voilà.
I've been studying for a brewing engineer, and of course it was difficult 25 years ago to start up in the Lambic world, but from the beginning of, even during my studies, I met the right people on the right moment, and so as being born in this village of the center of Pajottenland, for me it was natural that I want to make this beer survive. We only do traditional Lambic. We take in wort from 4 different villages of Pajottenland. The fermentation always starts here in the barrels during the next 3, 4, 5 years. And then we add fruit to make our own fruit Lambics, or we just will choose the perfect Lambics, young and old, to make the perfect gueuze. It takes 4 weeks to make a Trappist beer, but it takes 3 years. So that's 52 times more time to make an oude gueuze. So if you say then the price of a bottle of oude gueuze is too cheap. But people have to know the story behind the beer. That's important. Can you serve champagne into draft? No, it's just fake. So you don't have the spontaneous re-fermentation in a draft keg that you have in a bottle. If it's in a keg, then it's conditioned. And then, so it's not spontaneous, it doesn't belong in the Lambic world, it doesn't belong in the spontaneous re-fermentation. So my answer, no, simple as that. This one is 1 year old. It's perfect. It's evolving in the good direction, so it's all the breadths of Pajottenland in one glass. Indeed, for the traditional folk music you need to come to Gooik. We have several festivals going on, and also people can come to this village to learn to play again that old traditional music instruments, like you see them on the paintings of Breugel 500 years ago, the Flemish bagpipe, but also others like violins and guitars, and we have a really beautiful museum of that old instruments here in this village, and I think that's important. Lambic should have been protected by UNESCO a long time ago, because it's the combination of that old tradition of making beautiful folk music with Lambic, dancing, singing, having fun, and it still is alive in this village. So if people see that and they hear the music and they enjoy themselves, then they make the connection and then they realize how important Lambic is. And before you serve it, you have to make sure that you didn't have to move the bottle for more than 3-4 weeks. In the beginning days, there was a white stripe above the bottle to make sure what was the upper side and what was the lower side. The yeast will be from here to there, and we will not move it. It's like you put a little child in his cradle, so you put a bottle in the basket. The glass always has to be perfectly dry. Only then you can serve the perfect gueuze. It took us 3 years of our life to make a bottle like that, so you have to do it in a proper way. Voila. That's a good bottle of gueuze. You see how alive it is. You cannot have this kind of beautiful gueuze with beautiful foam, clear bright, when it's from draft. That you only have when you serve it like that. You respect the beer, then the beer respects you. We don't want yeast coming into your glass, because yeast will have a taste of more bitterness, and we don't want bitterness going along with the complexity of Lambic. I think honesty is important in the world. You have to be honest to the product you make and to the people you're selling your beer to. We sell to everybody. Everybody who is willing to come to my door, I will sell beer. Yeah? And I don't care where he comes from, whether he is from this village or from 10 kilometers or from 50,000 kilometers. If they respect Lambic as it is, and they don't wanting me to filter it, and they don't want me to put it into draft or kegs, then I will sell it. But I will never make a gueuze on draft, never.
Oud Beersel is an old Lambic brewery. It's a producer from 1882. But sadly the brewery closed down at the end of 2002. Before that it was the Van der Velden family that managed the brewery for the four generations. And in the beginning of 2003 I was sitting in a bar in Brussels drinking the gueuze of Oud Beersel, where the owner of the bar told me that it were his last couple of bottles and I couldn't get the beer anymore afterwards because the brewery closed down. So I looked up the phone number of the brewery in the yellow pages, contacted the old brewmaster, third generation, who explained me that his nephew continued the brewery for the last 10 years. But sadly afterwards he decided to close the brewery, close the bar next to the brewery. So I wanted to help out because I studied economics with IT management, nothing to do with beer. I wanted to help out after work in the evening or during the weekends, but he was 77 years old. So I decided to follow brewing courses in Ghent, brewed with the old brewmaster to take over his knowledge, and step by step decided to take over the brewery, relaunch the brewery in 2005. We invested in the traditional Lambic production, Lambic on wooden barrels, spontaneous fermentation, and then in 2007 we launched for the first time officially the Oude Geus and Oude Kriek of Oud Beersel. every brewery has its own barrel logo, and with that barrel logo you can identify what kind of beer is on that wooden barrel. And the Castle of Beersel has 3 towers, and this logo here represents in an easy way the Castle of Beersel, but this logo on wooden barrels means that the Lambic, the beer that is inside, is Lambic of Oud Beersel. Spontaneous fermentation in Lambic consists of 4 parts. So we have a Saccharomyces fermentation, but the first couple of days, initially, there's an endobacterial fermentation. And afterwards, we have a bacterial fermentation of lactic bacteries. And at the end, we have the Brettanomyces fermentation. The first 3 fermentation parts, they take 6 months. The last part of Brettanomyces take another 6 months. So the bread character is only developing afterwards. Why? Because these breads, they're working slow, and there are not other yeast and microorganisms active that work faster, so they will consume initially the sugars that are in the wort. Only after these microorganisms are not able to ferment anymore, then the Brettanomyces will kick in. Now, Lambic beers are known as being sour beers. But the sourness is mainly coming from the lactic fermentation. The first year of Lambic, mainly we have lactic fermentation. You have a hint of acidic acidity in the beer, a bit due to the fermentation, but the main acidic acidity is coming over time when the beer is aging on wooden barrels. We at Oud Beersel, we try to avoid as much acidic acidity as possible, because our mission is to safeguard traditional Lambic beers, and we want to make the beer accessible for consumers. If you look at the barrels here laying at the brewery as well, you see that we have barrels they're laying flat, whereas in producers of beer that make more acidic acidity on their beer, normally they put their barrels up. That's because there's less oxygen in a barrel when it's laying flat. So we do everything here. We have temperature control. We do a lot of operations here to make sure that we have as less acidic acidity as possible, so we can have very pleasant, enjoyable sour beers that are actually very refreshing. So this is a Lambic of 1 year old, it's from November 2017. Very fruity Lambic, very nice, very mild, but already quite complex. Well, we have Lambic and we have Gueuze, so we blend different barrels, different brews, different years of Lambic together to make a Gueuze. A Gueuze is simply put different years of Lambic put on a bottle, re-fermented on bottle. But it's not that easy. You have every barrel has a different flavor. So even one brew divided in different barrels gives different flavors on every barrel. So we have to taste all the barrels, we have to see how we're going to blend, what percentage we're going to blend of that barrel, of the different years, to come out with the Gueuze that has a very nice character and is pleasing to the consumer. I'm loving Lambic beers because even though we use traditional methods, we also use modern equipment, because the importance is that we make high quality of the beer, and high quality is coming due to using new technologies. We don't have to make Lambic beers like they made 50 years ago. We have to make Lambic beers with the current technology so that we can live up to the standards and the expectations of the consumer as well.
At the beginning, my first job was to do research. I made a PhD in statistical genetics. During 6 years, I was student assistant. At the same time, I wanted to change and to do something more practical. I finally found a job in a brewery, which was Heug Brewery. They do delirium tremens. And I was in contact with Armand de Belder from Driefontein. And I learned there to blend and to use the Lambic, Beaune, Lindemans, Girardin. After that, I had the chance to work at Cantillon. And after these two experiences, I decided to start my home blendery. It took me something like 1 year to make the business plan, to find the investors and so on. And I started my company in January 2009. And I started to buy wort at different suppliers, Beaune, Lindemans and Cantillon. And the year after, I had also Girardin. And my first gueuse was a blend of 1 and 2 years old Lambic that I sold in June 2011. Typically, a blend of Tilquin is 50% of 1 year old Lambic, 30% of 2 years old, and 20% of 3 years old Lambics. And usually, I use Beaune and Lindemans as 1 year old, Lindemans Girardin 2 years old, and Girardin Cantillon 3 years old. But for bars, I do a gueuse on draft, which is lighter in alcohol, which is around 5% alcohol, which is not made with 3 years old Lambics, and which is made with a low alcohol Lambic called Meerts or March. It's a 3.6% alcohol Lambic that I use as a 1 year old Lambic and to decrease the whole level of the blend, the whole level of alcohol. So the gueuse on draft is much more lighter in taste, lighter in alcohol, but it's very refreshing, very easy to drink, and it's a bit like a session gueuse. Thomas spent the first part of the morning taking samples on different barrels. We know where we go, so we don't take a lot of samples. We have something like 11 or 12 samples. When all the samples are ready, we taste together and we decide what we blend. And before to blend and before to bottle it, yes, we analyze each barrel so that we calculate on paper what will be the final gravity of the blend. It's a bit strange because we do the blend on paper before, and then we taste. So what we have is a Girardin 1 year old here. So Girardin is normally we don't use Girardin 1 year old, but we need this one today because for decreasing the whole level of sugar. And Girardin is normally used as 2 and 3 years old. Girardin and Lindemans are my two preferred Lambic. They are more tasty. And Girardin is the most tasty one. He is aging very well. If it's a small touch of acetic acid, then it's okay. But if it's only that, then it's a defect. It means that it was too much in contact with oxygen. So we try to avoid that. We try to avoid oxygen. We try to control the temperature. But if it's only one in a blend of 10, it's nice because it's we call that to give a kick to the blend. It's giving some punch to the blend. So the acetic acid is nice if you don't taste it at the end. So that in a blend it's okay. That's something I don't exactly understand, people saying that it's not possible to serve gueuse on draft. Technically it's possible, it's just a question of sugar content. If you make a blend like I do for my gueuse on draft, which is one plateau, so 10 grams of sugar per liter, then at the end I have something like 5 grams of CO2, so it's quite easy to serve. It's not super carbonated. If I do a gueuse with 7 or 8 grams of CO2 on draft, it will be difficult to serve for sure. But if you want to do a gueuse on draft, it's possible if you take into account the sugar content and try to control a little bit the saturation. But I do not saturate artificially. There is a re-fermentation in the keg, and it's a very refreshing gueuse, low in alcohol. that I do differently from the Gueuze on bottle. I think it's a product which is important now because we have a big demand for draft beer by the bar owners, and if we want to be present in specific beer bars and to reach new clients, we have to use the kegs for that. But I will keep doing mainly bottles. I will not do only kegs. But I think it's a nice product to let people taste the first time what is a Gueuze. My Gueuze on draft is not so complex, so it's very easy to start with, and then you can go to something more complex with a Gueuze on bottle.
First of all, I never drink Lambic alone, and I never drink beer alone, because I'm very lucky my wife likes beer too. So when I go, the Lambic I drink is normally Girardin, it's not far from here. I buy 10 liter Lambic, and we drink it together. When we're thirsty, so alone, with nothing, and also with barbecue. Because a barbecue is spicy, and the meat on a barbecue is rather fat. And the acidity of the Lambic takes away the fat in your mouth. So it's for fat food, ideal.
It depends on what you're looking for. If you look for, you can have the sourness in like for fish dishes, shellfish. It complements some meaty dishes, especially when you have greasy sauces. The Lambic cuts through the grease. You can do it with oysters, and then you also have the fruitiness who comes right up with the saltiness of the oysters. I always say you can wake me up anytime at night for just oysters with Gueuze. It's most simple, but it's the best.
I think Comté is the perfect cheese for Gueuze because first of its texture. Because Comté is just fat. Not too fat, it's not too creamy, it's a hard cheese but very buttery. So it's very good with Gueuze because Gueuze is something very balanced, fine bubbles, a little bit of more or less sourness. For a crick or a fruited Lambic, for me, the perfect cheese is Tom Fleuret, which is a Swiss cheese. And it's a raw milk and farmhouse product, very mild and very creamy.
It's very simple. Lambic, the base is acidic, sour, so it will cut the fats of most food. So it will work with meat, it will work with cheese, or even with desserts. It will work pretty well. Plus, Lambic goes very well with seafood. It's also like a white, very mineral, acidic white wine. Will work with oysters or any kind of seafood. It will work very well. So more or less, if you are doing beer pairing, Lambic is magic.
Et je cuisine aussi bien avec la bière parce que j'adore de cuisiner avec la bière. Pourquoi? C'est quand même un de nos références de notre patrimoine belge. Lambic pour moi c'est quelque chose d'exceptionnel parce que pour moi ça va aussi, ça peut toucher, faire l'esprit du vin, c'est-à-dire c'est une bière qui est tranquille, donc qui pétille pas. Et alors on peut avoir des notes comme on peut trouver dans les vins du Jura. Le Lambic pour cuisinier est assez intéressante. Donc, c'est-à-dire de lambic, on peut partir, on va vers la gueuse. Et avec la gueuse, on peut faire plusieurs recettes, plusieurs idées.
I think it's important to preserve this patrimonium and to try to make people understand that Lambic and the name Lambic has to be used only for beers produced in this region. So I'm pretty sure you can do a nice spontaneously fermented beer everywhere in the world if you have good conditions. But Lambic and Gueuze names should be only used in the original region.
We try to convince the industrial brewers to make more of the traditional products, and we have succeeded in that because now the traditional product has become so popular all over the world that they realize that we have to take care of that heritage of that which is Lambic and which is a spontaneous fermentation with a spontaneous re-fermentation in the bottle. And so we have convinced the big ones to do the traditional products again, and so I'm glad. But what will it give within 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? I don't know. It depends on climate, it depends on how we as brewers treat each other. Should we keep on working as friends, as colleagues? Because as colleagues we just want to protect Lambic.
Well, there is a revival. I saw that when we started out Beersel in 2005 and we relaunched the Gueuze and the Creek in 2007, there was only limited interest in it. And it's since the last 5 to 8 years that you've seen a big evolution in it, and people are coming from all over the world to taste some Lambic beers and to discover what Lambic beers are all about. We didn't have that initially. So before, when I started with Beersel, people declared me nuts. They said, look here, this is an old brewery. You make Lambic beers, it's only for the elder generation because nobody else drinks Lambic beers anymore. So when that elder generation disappears, you won't have any customers anymore. Whereas now we see people 20 years old coming from other countries discovering Lambic beers. So we are very happy that there's a revival of the Lambic beers, and especially that there's a younger generation interested in it. Because the mission of Beersel, safeguarding traditional Lambic beers, is not for today, not for tomorrow, but for the next couple of generations. So we need youngsters interested in Lambic beers.
I think there will be a golden future because more and more people in the world understands the problem of sugar. When you go to the USA, you see what it means, sugar. 50–60% of the people is too thick. Secondly, when you're thirsty, sweetened drinks like Coca-Cola, well, 1 hour later, you're thirsty again because sweetness cannot fight thirst as acid drinks fight thirst. More and more people will go back to nature. The most natural beer of the world is Lambic.
We have demands from all over the world for bottles of Gueuze, so there is a huge demand, and I hope that if the quality of all the producers stays like it is today, there is a nice future. If in the past there have been sometimes copycats with just cheap filtered sour beer sold as Gueuze, and it did a lot of damage to the market. So we will see. We hope to have an image strong enough in the market so that customers know the difference or taste the difference between high quality and maybe others that will appear. But I hope we will not be too much copycatted by other qualities.
We never know. No, it should be certainly a mistake to think that no, everything is running well, is working in the right way, and nothing could happen. No, certainly not. That's so. We lived very difficult time, and finally, it's maybe for me a positive note to fight it with my parents to defend such a beer, because I know that we had a lot of difficulties to to preserve such a beer. And we have to stay humble.
I think there is more future for younger brewers, a starting brewer, small, like I did before, and growing and growing and growing. Because you have to know, you need to construct or you build up your stock. It takes 4 years that a Lambic brewery can bring the Gueuze on the market. And that's a lot of investment in stock. The most important thing for us is that it takes years, and I hope, and I mean that we have younger guys just here in the region. Because Lambic for me means Brussels, 20 kilometers around. That's the Lambic region for me. And that I hope that we can have a future with younger, smaller brewers, blenders. We will see what brings us the future. And that's a good thing because this is a unique beer. And I lived all the disappearing from the Lambic families, brewers stopping because you couldn't make your living anymore. And nowadays we can have a regular, normal price for the bottle and that we can invest and that we can grow. This was not possible like 20 years ago, I forget it.
When I started here, I've heard about the bad times that the Lambic was going through, but I've never experienced it. So for me, this is how it is today, and in my opinion, it will never be different. I only think it will get bigger, not big in commercialization or something, but I think there are still a lot of people who don't know the product and who don't know like the craft beer scene. And once they get in contact with it, I think you'll never get away from it.
Let's say 20 years ago, people were not drinking Lambic anymore, people were not drinking Gueuze anymore. And there is even a revival of these beers here in the Buitenland and the Seine Valley. People are proud now that we have these products. People understand that these products are unique in the world. And we are the beacon for a lot of other producers of spontaneous fermentation beers now elsewhere in the world who are inspired by our Lambic tradition.
A few years ago, I think that I had a good sentence for the Lambic. I said that the Lambic is the past, the present and the future. It's the past because it's the oldest way to make a beer. It's natural and the process haven't really changed the last 300 or 400 years. So it's the past. It's the present because right now people in the bar or here we can drink some Lambic. And it's the future because Lambic can be only brewed if you respect the nature, the season and the time. And for our agriculture, for what we are drinking or beverage or food, respecting the season, the nature is a part of our future. It's at least what I'm thinking is the best for us. So Lambic is everything, the mother of all the beers, the present, the past, the future. It's the soul of the beer.